I'm going to read through the essay 2 prompt in this short video. So if you feel like you have a good understanding of the prompt and you want to move towards looking at my example for brainstorming it, you can skip this. But it's important that you have a good understanding of the prompt before you move on. So if you want to stick with me for 5 minutes, I'm going to read it. The premise behind this prompt is that as the story of the elephant illustrates, it is hard to fully understand something if we look at it in isolation. This folktale offers us important wisdom, for it reminds us that to see clearly, we must learn to see things in relation to one another. For example, can we understand cancer by just looking through the microscope at cancer cells? Or do we need to understand other factors that cause cancer, such as heredity, environmental toxins, and diet? If we are to successfully combat cancer, we need to consider it within a larger context of factors. We could expand this context even further and ask, why do some people get cancer while others don't? Are poor people most likely to die from cancer? Why? Similarly, we can't treat the problem of obesity as a simple issue. Is obesity about making bad choices? To what extent is it also about poverty, food deserts, and corporations more interested in profit than public health? To what extent is obesity a consequence of limited access to health care? How does obesity relate to education? In other words, to fully understand the issues we face as a society, we have to think of those issues within a larger framework. Okay, so that's the main idea here about what we're going to be doing. And if you're at this point and you're not quite sure, you might reread this section so that you have a really good sense of what our approach is based upon. Okay, now the next section, your task. In your first essay, I asked you to look at the way that Parable of the Sower presented a particular social issue. I asked you to look closely at one detail from the novel and to analyze that detail as a sign of an embedded social problem. Now we are going to look at the issues illustrated in the novel within a larger context. More specifically, I want you to take one social issue you see in Parable of the Sower, and I want you to point out how this issue is either a cause and or consequence of another issue. This essay is about illustrating how social issues are entangled together. So entangled, in fact, that it's hard to fully understand one issue without considering the other issues at the same time. This essay will also require a bit of research. While you will rely on the novel as your primary text, you will need to use at least 2 outside sources to reinforce the validity of your argument. Okay, so now we realize we're going to be writing about an issue in relationship to another issue, and that we're going to have to use some research to help support our argument. But it says we're going to rely on the novel as our primary text, which means we're still going to be needing to use the novel as a basis. We're going to be using the novel to show the initial issue or issues. We'll get more into that soon. Okay, so the assignment itself is that in an essay of 3 to 5 pages, double-spaced, you need to answer the following prompt. How does Parable of the Sower reveal the interconnection of 2 different issues? And why does this matter? So I see that there's 2 questions here. The second question, why does this matter? I think I'm going to hold off on that because I can't really answer that until I've answered the first question. And the first question asks me to look at 2 different issues and how they're interconnected. So I know I'm going to have to choose 2 different issues. And let's see, the essay needs to begin with a thesis that answers the prompt, of course, and explaining and illustrating my thesis, and asserting why it is important. Okay, so I'm going to return to these 3 questions, these 3 components a little later in my writing process to make sure that I'm doing the 3 things I'm being asked to do, and to be sure that I'm answering the prompt. And here are some words of advice. Let's see. Feel free to address the same issue you wrote about in Essay 1, but you'll need to show how this issue is interconnected with another issue. Okay, well that's nice because if I feel really interested and invested in what I wrote about for Essay 1, I can revisit that idea. Let's see. Another piece of advice is to start with one issue and then consider whether it is a cause or effect of any other issues. Select the most surprising connection you find and make it the focus of your essay. All right. Or think of two issues that stand out to you. Can you see a connection between these two issues? Keep brainstorming connections until you find something interesting. Look for the most surprising connection and make that the focus of your essay. Now, why am I asking you to look for the most surprising connection? Because one of the things we're going to be talking about in this module is that we are writing for a real person. We're writing for a reader, an audience. And as a real person, do you want to read an essay that surprises and interests you? Or do you want to read something that just tells you what you already know? For example, would it be interesting to read a paper that says fossil fuels cause climate change? I would think the answer is no, because you already know that. But there are a lot of other connections you could make that the reader might not have thought about before, or that maybe you've considered but you've never thought in depth about. So those are the types of connections you're going to be looking for, not the obvious connections that your reader already knows. Okay, now if you cannot think of any connections between two issues, you might need to try pondering different issues. And here are some issues you could consider. These all, we see all of these within the novel. And of course, there's other issues that are not listed. These are only a few. So you could spend time brainstorming, what are all the issues I've seen in this novel before you get started? And you might choose something you find interesting that you haven't thought a lot about before. Perhaps privatization would be interesting, to think about the town of Olivar and how it has been privatized. In other words, instead of belonging to a city or to a state, it belongs to a corporation. And what does that mean? And how would we connect that with other issues? The key is to choose an issue that you really want to learn more about, because you're going to be doing some research. So don't choose two things that you know a lot about, that you can make an obvious thesis about. Choose something that you might want to learn more about, and you'll write a better essay. Okay, so that is the basic set of expectations. I see there's a rubric down here. This is worth 100 points. And it's going to be graded based on, let's see, the 20 points for organization, 20 points for analysis or insight, 20 points for how well I support my claims, 10 points for style and grammar, 15 points for a strong introduction and thesis, and 15 points for a conclusion. And that is a total of 100. So I can see that the teacher is going to be looking mostly, these are the big ones: organization, insight, and support. However, I am going to be getting graded separately for introductions, conclusions, and thesis statements. So I got to make sure I do a good job on this stuff as well. All right. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to take you towards a brainstorming example.